Thank you and welcome to our Gender Inclusivity panel. I'm really excited to have 4 incredible guests with us today. We're going to start, I will just mention that there should be 2 documents available for you to use alongside this panel today. First is a glossary, and secondly is like a checklist to help you consider things that will help to steamroll your way into making sure you're inclusive from the go. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Aidan. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm going to whip around and introduce all of our panelists. Amru, would you like to go first? Tell me name, pronouns, and why you're here today.
Hello, my name is Amru Al-Qadi, or Glamru. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm here because I need queer solidarity with what's going on in the world.
Thank you. Jamie, would you like to go next?
Hello, I am Jamie Bundas. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm here also just to kind of share a message that is still relevant right now. You know, we all still need to be having these conversations and come together at this point. So I'm glad that we can still make this happen.
Thank you. Kate, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, my name is Kate O'Donnell. I am the artistic director of Trans Creative. I had a bit of sound feedback there. Trans Creative. I'm also a writer and performer, and this is my first kind of post-coronavirus get-together. So this might be the beginning of something we're going to have to get used to. So here goes.
Thank you. Saba.
Hey everyone, I'm Saba. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I'm here today because I'm passionate about gender inclusivity and thinking intersectionally.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So for our first question, I want to talk about what is the benefits? Why would organizations want to have gender inclusivity? For a organization where the majority, if not everyone, is cis within an organization, why would they want to be inclusive? What's the benefits of attracting a gender diverse either customers or staff? If anyone would like to start off.
It is the kind of moral position of like, why you never know, really. You can't really assume anyone's gender experience or gender identity, and whether or not you have any kind of trans or non-binary employees, sort of adjusting the space so that it's as inclusive as possible will mean that anyone who does eventually work there will just feel safe. I mean, truly it's about the safety for employees, but future employees or any employees, and it might encourage a workforce that you didn't even know was there who was really, really talented.
Thank you. So we've got the idea of safety and moral obligation to include as many people as possible. But I also hear you mention possible talents and the diversity of what's available to those sort of throughout the gender spectrum. Would anybody else like to expand on why that would be of benefit to organizations?
So I think when you see that an organisation has made some headway and kind of opened their idea up to genders beyond cisgender, I feel it makes them look more current and a bit more of an exciting organisation. And I think more connected to what's going on in the world. I think often we look at organisations and we're kind of waiting for them to catch up. So I think it's very positive when an organisation makes those steps. So it's not kind of waiting sometimes for people who are not cis, you know, gender variant, trans, non-binary, to have to kind of knock on their door and tell them. I think it's really positive that an organisation leads that rather than it always being trans people having to knock the door down and kind of make people aware of it.
Thank you, Kate. So I hear you talking about the excitement that's involved in already having that that representation starting to come through and having that come out in the product or in the environment as a result. Jamie or Saba, is there anything you'd like to add on that topic?
Yeah, I think that if you look, because I work quite a lot within the fashion industry and kind of quite often behind the scenes with those brands, and they're always so hesitant to kind of move forward. And kind of to similarly say like what Kate has said, like when you see brands that actually are pushing forward, it's so easy and it makes them seem so much more exciting, and it's often really frustrating to see people and organisations not want to push forward to not just make their staff feel safer, but their customers feel safer, depending on how they identify. And it's one of those things that I think is so influenced by media hostility and media hysteria, and so many people thinking that this is a situation that's up for debate or kind of discussion still, that people move forward, which is really frustrating because, like you say, when brands or people and organizations actually do it, it's so seamless and so easy that they should be a shining light to other people to say, this is actually so easy and massively impactful to gender variant people that want to use their services.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for adding that. Sabra, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just kind of adding to what Jamie said, I think like generally like gender inclusivity just helps everyone. I think that thinking about inclusive practice makes sure it's everyone's responsibility to be inclusive, and it doesn't just fall on the trans person or non-binary person or you know, minority marginalized person to do that work. And learning about different genders and everything helps me to understand my gender better. Like even when I didn't know what trans was, just understanding there were all these different identities and different ways of expressing gender just made me get to know myself a bit better on a personal level. And I also agree with Kate that it just makes the environment, the culture more exciting. Even stuff around language in particular, like if you make your language more trans inclusive, more gender inclusive, the language just becomes more exciting. We're not going to like those usual, you know, offensive, problematic, gendered, stereotypical words to describe people. We're having to think a bit more and be creative. And I really love that. I love challenging people when they're like really like, is you want to describe like that person is pretty and that person is handsome and they look like a girl and look like a boy, like let's be a bit more creative around it. So I think it's pretty exciting too.
And also, like, to pick up on that, gender affects everyone, even if you're cis, obviously. And like, I thought it was important to note, I mean, it's not gone, but obviously there's such a crisis in the media, which is so transphobic at the moment. But, you know, the research is showing that the people who are most being policed out of women's bathrooms are actually, you know, butch lesbians who have short hair are suddenly getting so much gender violence in in women's changing rooms or toilets because they don't adhere to cisgender appearances or whatever. So, you know, I don't think gender just affects trans and non-binary people. It you know, gender affects everybody, and actually it's for everyone's betterment, I think. So I think that's why it's important, no matter what kind of organization you are.
Thank you, Amru. Yourself and Jamie particularly spoke about safety, which and it ended there talking about spaces, which takes me on nicely to our next question, which is how can we ensure that, and we can be the queer community, but also the cis community, make sure that spaces are accessible for anyone who is gender variant. What things are we looking for in particular to help make that feel, or be it safe, or be it something else a little bit more to what makes it accessible?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, I had a meeting the other day and someone was just like, we really want to make our space inclusive, but we just have no idea what to do. And he was like, do you know what to do? And I was like, well, of course we know what to do. And it's like, I think a lot of people get so caught up in like not knowing what to do, and they often then do nothing because they fall into this category of like, we don't want to do the wrong thing, so we're just going to do nothing. And it's like, actually what you need to be doing is hiring trans people as consultants to allow the spaces that you want to create to be more inclusive, whether that be through language or through literal physical space, or through looking at like the intersectionalities of our identities. Like often we want sober spaces, often we need spaces that aren't fully, you know, for people with ADHD or people who need kind of spaces that aren't as audiovisual. And it's about just listening. I think people often see all these issues and they're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. So they like I say, end up doing nothing. So actually listening to us and hearing what we have to say, I think, is the step number one on that list.
Something that we've done creative is go to buildings that we're kind of about to put on events at and actually ask them what gender they think their building is. And then that kind of often starts up a bit of interest and a bit of dialogue with that organisation. And some buildings like that are built in the Victorian time, they feel they're very masculine or very feminine or they're a bit more fluid. And I think it's quite an interesting starting point. And then we kind of work on this project we've been doing for a while now called Transing Up Buildings in Manchester on the whole. And I think some of it is about holding events. Maybe there are some places and buildings and organisations where they have no trans visibility at all, or any kind of relationship with trans, or any kind of profile as being open to trans people. And by holding events there, like we had an event last year at the Royal Exchange, it was called 100 Trans Voices, and that was deliberate. And we literally got 100 trans voices in one event. And I've noticed now when I go back into the Royal Exchange, like there has things happened around the building. Some people transitioned last year, some staff transitioned in that building. They're kind of thinking about the toilets and they're thinking about the signage and who's visible and the representation. So I think placing ourselves in events and being welcomed into buildings is a bit of a step. It's a step working with those buildings and kind of just physically being present, having a lot of trans people feeling like this becomes our building.
Thank you, Kate, for talking particularly about spaces there. Does anyone else want to jump in and add on to that about space and how we can make it inclusive for those who...
Yeah, I think it's definitely around thinking creatively and remembering that the people who are physically in front of you in that space is not everyone who needs access to that space or who would want to be there. Our community is massive and we have to think in loads of different ways how we can include everyone. I remember I was in Toronto and I went to a queer Muslim prayer space mosque called New Unity Mosque, and they live streamed on Facebook all their Jummah prayers, their Friday prayers and sermons, and I can hear like alarm bells of like, protecting anonymity and stuff, but what they did is they faced the camera on the laptop to the people giving the sermon, so everyone in the room was anonymous unless they spoke, and they had people on chat on Facebook and included them in the kind of go round as well, and it was just so beautiful. You could see like people joining this the live stream, and people who weren't just in Canada but like all over the world, just because accessing prayer spaces, especially for queer and trans Muslims, isn't, we don't get to do that often, and just seeing how this tiny little space in Toronto is actually including people from like all over the world was amazing. I think especially now with this distancing and isolating and quarantining, we have to think in these ways, and we have to think digitally, in particular about our youth work. How are we going to translate our youth work online, and just making sure that there are multiple ways to access that work, and making sure that doesn't go away when we start going back to our offices or back to our youth groups or back to our centres and everything like that, because we're including people who aren't always going to be able to access buildings. So I think we've really got to take this opportunity to make sure that we kind of transform space in that way too.
Thank you for mentioning digital spaces, particularly that is, does anyone have any examples or models of how digital space can be used to help connect, be that in a variety of different ways? Does anyone feel like that's something we want to talk about more?
I learned makeup through Instagram, and I talked to a lot of kind of queer Arabs who, don't, who aren't in the UK, and who are, Iraqis, queer Iraqis who I know who are in Iraq, who find, obviously they can't express themselves in physical space because of, the attitudes towards homosexuality there, and in general, just the risk to safety. So but I do get a lot of them messaging on Instagram, and we swap makeup tips, or I give advice or they give advice, or just to have a conversation. And I think as we enter kind of Corona period, the epoch that none of us saw coming, I think queer people have always been quite good online at lifting each other up. I know if I feel very low, I always just look at memes my queer friends create to just lift me up. But yeah, I think there's so much because I've had a lot of drag shows cancelled because of Corona, which was a significant part of my income. But I'm just trying to figure out at the moment, like, it's about being a queer Muslim, and I would like to get that material out there. So what's going to be the best way to use digital space to tell that story and to connect with other queer Arabs? I don't know yet, but it's going to obviously be a really trying time, but maybe there'll be a way for us to digitally create spaces. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is yet, I suppose. But I mean, because we're just really doing it as it goes.
Thank you. Anybody else got anything they want to add to that line of thought?
Yeah, we are planning our Trans Vegas Festival at the moment, and it's looking, who knows what's going to happen in June, but we were thinking digitally, and it feels like a really new, nice, creative it's not new. Digital connection with trans communities, like Amma was just saying, has been vital for me and for many others, and I think a lot of our community have connected digitally. But like very quickly, just talking to people, like we were talking to Zorian, who has unfortunately had the BFI Flair Festival, which is a queer film festival. It's just been kind of cancelled. So they're going to be doing stuff online. So immediately I was like, well, can you pull together like a Transflix list of films that we could be watching and links, so when we all get bored of our Netflix, we can move on to Transflix and all have a collection of stuff. And I think that thing of sharing what we've seen and inspiring, because I think trans people, we can find what we need. I mean, we did an event, Flair Festival last year, where we looked at our childhood, films from our childhood that weren't made for us as trans people. But I think digitally we find ourselves and we look for ourselves all the time. Mm-hmm. So I think it's quite nice if we make that journey a little bit easier and serve it up sometimes, so it's a bit easier to find. We're not having to decode it or hunt it down. So I think digital is a place that I've looked, and I think many of the trans community have, because we're quite isolated, even if we live in big cities, or even if there isn't coronavirus. So yeah, I think it's going to push that a bit more.
Thank you, Kate. I'll move the conversation along. A couple of you mentioned intersectional identities, and my question is, how can we ensure that barriers are acknowledged, recognised and overcome, and to accessing spaces or being part of organisations?
Yeah, I can go first. I think that recognizing our own identities is a really good place to start off with, and exploring my own identity. When I started thinking about my own identity from a position of power and privilege instead of learning from a place of oppression, I felt like I understood how I navigate in the world and across different identity groups just so much better. I think understanding, like, learning about different experiences helped me understand myself a lot better too, and then understand like what the barriers are that I'm putting in place that other communities will be facing, because I know the barriers that I face, and I'll talk about it with my friends all the time, with other people of color, with other trans people or other Muslims. We know the barriers we face because we're told the same things very often, but actually understanding what it is that I'm doing was really helpful. There was one book in particular which was a real turning point for me, and just shifting my focus like away from like myself in this kind of like very insular, isolated place, and thinking about like the other people in my community. And that was reading Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano, and that really it was great because I'm also a feminist, and it just wove together everything in a way that just made sense. It was personal and political, and I think we all need to be reading experiences that aren't our own, just to shift our gaze and change our lens a little bit.
I'm hearing a lot there about sharing stories and yeah, being available to listen to other people's experiences. Kate, I know that for you, for trans creative, telling our own stories is your kind of catchline. Is that something you'd like to expand upon and talk about, and how that can help us overcome, you know, barriers, particularly for those of intersectional identities?
Well, I feel a bit old sometimes, you know, even now, just like unmute, you know, and I think there's stuff around class and around age and all the other intersectionalities, but I suppose that's probably what I can talk about in terms of when I'm programming work, that I have to be really aware of who I am. And I think getting different people in to curate the work and actively look for the intersectionality of our community is really important, and it's not difficult. And the thing is, you know, like last year we started off our event with a collaboration with the Cocoa Butter Club. So we that was our initial collaboration, and we just set them the task of having trans people of colour in that cabaret, and that was the first time they'd completely curated an event with that. So that kind of moved them on, and it was great for us as an opening event. And then I think we had specific things for trans-masculine people, non-binary people. And then this year we have looked at age, and we've looked at the intergenerational issues that go on within our community, because there is quite a divide. I mean, I'm 55, and I think sometimes the community can be really divided by the kind of young. I often wonder if somebody was in their 70s could come out as non-binary. You know, I feel like it's almost like the realm of the young, pierced, fabulous, beautiful. You know, there is this kind of it's quite easy for age to come in and feel like the community is different bits of the community can't access what's going on. So I think there is something about being aware of your own part in that, and when I'm in charge of something, it's like I have to step down. Like in last year's events, I think I appeared in one. The rest of them, it's about handing over that to people from that community, and saying, they kept coming to me for the first event, the Cocoa Butter. What about the DJ? I went, I don't know. Talk to people who are running the event, you know, and bat it back. The same with the trans-masculine event. It's like, I didn't speak at it. It's not my event. I don't want to be the face of being trans. That would be really limited. And I think we see a lot of older white trans women, and I think unless you've got something to say, shut up and let someone else have a go. Which I'll do now.
Very beautiful sentiment. Would anybody else like to continue with that?
Yeah, with intersectionality, it's like something I think about a lot, because there are different needs for different groups. Like for me, a lot of gay spaces can feel very, very white and quite racist. And obviously there has been, you know, a surge of Islamophobia within some gay communities. You know, like I think it was in France, it was like a third of gay married men in Paris voted for Marie Le Pen, because they were persuaded that Islam would sort of take away their rights. So, you know, you can't just have these sort of homogenous. I think when people watch film and TV and you go to a gay club and there's like drag queens and pups with leather and trans people and gay men, and it's like a pick a mix of all different queer identities. Actually, like there are different sometimes needs for different queer people. So I think it's important for, like, let's say gay clubs, for me, you know, they can be quite transphobic and quite racist actually. And I think a lot of gay people, because they're gay, don't understand that, and they go, oh well, it's a gay club, so it's fine. So it's about almost teaching our own community the intricacies and different needs of different groups. You know, I know a lot of queer Arabs just don't like going to Pride because they just think, oh God, there's just so many kind of white bodies here, and are we going to go through similar things? So I think it's also about teaching our own community to be kinder to other people within it.